Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's episode, we are just going to be reviewing two beers. These are both dark beers, though different styles, but a common element is that they are both have chocolate in them, but they both have other things to go along with it. So, to start out, we're going to be jumping to the Copper Kettle Brewing Company a Mexican-style chocolate stout. This is brewed with chocolate, chilies, and spices. Those spices, a little nondescript. I'm not sure what all else they have in there, but sounds really good and kind of a neat-looking, can art on here. Looks pretty neat. Nonetheless, that's 7%. They are based out of Denver, Colorado. And then the second beer, we are jumping over to the Icicle Brewing Company's Dark Persuasion. And this is a German chocolate cake flavored dark ale, 6.5%, and they are out of Leavenworth, Washington. So suffice to say, both of these beers sound completely amazing, and I am absolutely ready to jump right in. So we're going to do just that, starting with the Copper Kettle's Mexican-style chocolate stout. Okay, jumping right in this with the Copper Kettle Mexican-style chocolate stout, 7%, again, brewed with chilies, chocolate, and spices. I'm going to do myself at least the favor to look on here. Aha! I found the extra spices. Okay, so cacao nibs, it's got cassia cinnamon, and they have a different blend of dried chilies. So this is kind of the classic Mexican-style chocolate drink from Maya and Aztec culture, certainly being based in Mexico. But yeah, I imagine this is going to be really good. I've never had a beer by this brewer and never had quite a Mexican style chocolate beer. I imagine as a stout that this is going to pair quite well. Really nice tall can, so there's no shot that this is going to fit in my glass, but let's go ahead and get this poured. It's got some thickness to it, but it doesn't look overtly thick, and it's got a bit more effervescence than I would have anticipated, which is not a bad thing. It's going to help it form a decent head here, being poured from the can. Yep, and indeed it did. That's a pretty fine head for a stout here from the can. Holding it up, it's not imperial, but this stout is absolutely pitch black. So we're talking very, very deeply roasted malts here. It is a lovely thing to behold. The head, it's not super creamy, but it did bloom up reasonably well. But most of the bubbles are large and medium, so it's collapsing here quite quickly, as you can see. I'm going to get a sniff. Wow. Wow, that smells really, really good. You can smell the chocolate very pungently up front, and you can really smell the cinnamon and the chilies as well. The chocolate's kind of the forefront with the cinnamon behind it, and then the chilies behind that, kind of in that order of pungency of the aroma. I'm going to see if I can pick up any malt in here. Not really. The spices they have in here to make this beer kind of overpower the malt, and I'm sure it's going to have a malt backbone, but it doesn't come through in the aroma. Nonetheless, the head has settled down here, kind of like I expected with one that effervescent and bubbles going that heavily. So let's jump right in. Give this a sip. Okay. Okay. That's a good beer. Not what I was anticipating based on the aroma, but it's very good. Up front, the very first flavor that you get is this interesting. If you caught the review where I did the Gigantic Brewing's Hellboy Liz Sherman chocolate mole chili stout or mole chili stout or whatever it was, it's a similar flavor to that. When you brew with chilies, you got to be very careful because the flavor of the chili can overpower the other ingredients in the beer and come very strong to the forefront. That's the first flavor you get in this, but not anywhere near the same level of intensity as it was in the Hellboy, which I was not the biggest fan of personally, and I thought it might be a bit too chili intensive for the average palate. And I don't mean heat or chili. I mean, it tastes like eating mouthful of just chili flesh, which is kind of off-putting in a beer. But that's what you get up front. And then it's got this slight, it's not sweet, but it gives the impression of sweet. And then it opens up to this rich chocolate that pairs with that cinnamon. And you still get to taste the chilies in the back. And then it opens up finally to the malt backbone. It's very nice. Let me have another sip to explore the body and mouthfeel. I was so focused on the flavor. It's got a nice body. I'd say it's medium overall. Mouthfeel is silky smooth. I tell you, the more of this I drink, the more of this I like it. Once it opens up and the chilies blend with that chocolate and cinnamon, it's just such a perfect, beautiful balance of all the ingredients. And while this beer is not viscous, it's very creamy, it does stick around the palate and let these flavors linger. It's got a nice long finish. I am still tasting all of that pairing of chocolate and cinnamon and chilies, and it's absolutely delicious. And where the malt comes into play is on the back end with the finish with all those ingredients together. And it's a very, even though it's this dark, it's a lighter malt backbone. It's not super deep or rich. It's got more of an earthy presence, which really pairs well with the flavorings of this beer. This is really nice as is. I would imagine that if somebody wanted to turn this into a milk stout and throw a little lactose in there, with these flavorings, that this would just be another completely different version of this beer that would just knock it out of the park. I just have a sneaky suspicion. But nonetheless, as it were, as a non-sweet Mexican style chocolate stout, this is really nicely well put together. I really enjoy this. The balance is great. The body and mouthfeel are great. The finish is nice and really lets you taste it. I mean, I'm still getting it. It's a very, very long finish. Don't get me wrong. It's much quicker progression of tapering off in flavor intensity the longer it goes out, but you can still get it. This is a nice beer. I'm going to take my time enjoying this nice big can here to get through, and we'll jump back. And next up is the Icicle Brewing Dark Persuasion. That's the German chocolate cake dark ale at 6.5%. All right, moving on to our second and our final beer of today's review. This is the Icicle Brewing Company's Dark Persuasion, which is a German chocolate cake flavored dark ale, which ought to be really, really good. German chocolate cake loaded with chocolate, rich dark chocolate, and the frosting is typically a lighter chocolate mixed with like a cream cheese, and it has a little coconut in there as well. So it's a very decadent, rich dessert, which I think ought to translate quite well into beer. 6.5% ABV on this one. Again, this brewer, Icicle Brewing, is based out of Leavenworth, Washington. Let's go ahead and get this poured into the glass. Nice big bottle, so I don't have to worry about trying to get it all in here. Okay, it's not super viscous on the pour, and it's got some decent carbonation. It ought to form a little bit of a head here. Yeah, it sure enough did. Actually, pretty decent head there. It's not super creamy, really. The foam has really super fine bubbles mixed with kind of some medium and big ones. It's not super creamy, but it's really tightly formed. Now, this isn't absolute pitch black. I can actually see a little light through this at the very, very bottom, but mostly it's super, super dark, which is nice appearance-wise. Let's give it a sniff here. Okay, it's not a super pronounced aroma, but it smells a little sweet, and you can smell the coconut quite strongly, and a little bit of chocolate and a little bit of the malty backbone. But you really got to breathe in deeply to really pick any of it up. The coconut is the aroma that comes through above all else. Yeah, it smells nice though. It does smell nice. You just got to really give it a good sniff. Head to settle down. Let's jump right in. Oh, oh, that's so, so rich. Oh, that's super rich. Okay, okay. It's got a super fine mouthfeel. It's got a medium body. It's not super heavy. It's got a medium body. Finish is lasting quite long. Up front, you get a lot of coconut, and it actually starts to take on this hazelnut-like quality, kind of like a combination of toasted coconut and hazelnut. And then you get that chocolate that comes through, but the coconut is kind of the dominant flavor here. Chocolate comes through in the back. It's kind of a mix of bittersweet and bitter, like baker's chocolate. Nothing super sweet about the chocolate side of it, but there is a sweetness that comes through in the back end of this beer, and it just continues to go on with a mix of kind of coconut and chocolate. A little bit of the malt in the back, just a slight roastiness, but really, I know there's no hazelnut in this. That's not traditionally in a German chocolate cake, but it gives the impression of hazelnut. I think it's probably the toasty edge to the coconut, which in beer form I have found can often kind of let out this hazelnut-like flavor, which is not bad. I like it. It's just kind of interesting in this beer. Have another sip here. Yeah, nice medium body, super silky smooth mouthfeel. Very much coconut up front. Breaks away to what tastes like hazelnut. Then you start to get the chocolate intermingling, still coconut dominant, little chocolate, little slight semi-sweet. It breaks away into the more bitter, and you start to get the roast of the malts. All the while, this coconut is still just lingering, and it just slowly dissipates in its intensity all the way to the end of the finish, which is quite long. This is a nice beer. This is another one that I would consider to be dessert beer, just based on the flavor profile, and then it has that sweetness to it. So even though it's not body-wise super duper heavy, it's just medium, and it's not super viscous, it's rather creamy. Just the ingredients that went into it, the overall sensory experience makes it a heavier beer. This is not one you would want to chug. This is a slow sipping beer. It's very nice. It's reasonably well balanced. I think it might be a bit coconut forward, really, in a German chocolate cake. The chocolate's the star, the coconut's a garnish. But it's nice. This is an enjoyable beer. It's got quality ingredients, and they've definitely brewed it well. I'm going to take my time slowly enjoying this while I really, really think about the scores. And we'll come back and get both of these beers ranked after I get to work these scores up. I want to give it a proper think. So I'm going to take many test sip samples here. This beer is throwing me off a little bit. I want to make sure I get it exactly right, but we'll see you back. Okay, now that we've gotten to sample both of these beers, we're going to go through the ratings, starting with the Copper Kettle Brewing's Mexican Style Chocolate Stout. This, again, was brewed with chilies, chocolate, and spices, which specifically is cassia cinnamon. 7% ABV on this one out of Denver, Colorado. This was a really nice beer. The aroma came through quite strongly, and you could really smell all of the flavoring ingredients in this beer. The chocolate, the chilies, and indeed the cinnamon came through quite strongly. It was a lovely aroma. I give it 9 out of 10. For the taste, I really enjoyed this, but I thought, kind of like with several reviews ago, the Hellboy, Gigantic Brewing's Hellboy Le Sherman Chili Mole Stout, that the chilies just, it's a tricky ingredient with which to brew. It can easily overpower the flavor profile of everything else in your beer, and I thought it was just a little heavy there. It could have used a little more chocolate and a little more cinnamon forward, and probably that would have kicked it up for me. As it were, still well above average. I gave it a 7. For the body, this was nice. This is not an imperial stout, though 7%, it's kind of encroaching into the higher ABV territory. It's in that murky gray area, but as it were, still had a nice robust body. I gave it an 8 out of 10. The mouthfeel on this was wonderful. Wonderful for a stout. Just super smooth, had this nice creamy texture to it. It really helped all the flavors stick around the palate. I gave it a 9, just 1 point shy of perfection. The finish on this was ridiculously long. It just kept going and going and going. And it was very steady with how it produced its flavor profile and how it came on and how it dissipated. Very much followed a bell curve, and it was very even. So it came on in a bigger, bigger, bigger explosion, and then slower, 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 slower. And then the tapering away side, that end of the bell curve was quite a bit longer than the front side, because that finish just kept going and going, but it very evenly dissipated. It was very nice. I give it a perfect 10 out of 10. Head and retention on this, it was okay. This, it comes down to another one of those examples of it's not on a draft, it's not nitro, it's just from a can, and how I pour it and how it goes into my glass and the condition of my glass. But I thought it was okay. I give it average 5 out of 10. The appearance on this was a lovely stout. It was deep, dark, just black as night. Even with fewer fermentables, not imperial, it was lovely. I gave it a 10 out of 10. Balance-wise, I really, really enjoyed the balance because you could get a lot of interplay of all of the flavors that went into this. The classic flavors that go into the Mayan and Aztec style, like they invented hot chocolate. We just stole it and took out the chilies effectively. Probably most places take out the cinnamon as well, but a lot of places still add it. But nonetheless, the balance was very, very nice. The only thing that kept me from giving it perfection was just I needed a little more chocolate presence and I needed a little more cinnamon presence and just dial back the chili flavor just a tick. The heat was great, but a 9 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, I also gave this a 9 out of 10, and it's for the exact same reason. Just a slight little nitpick of the balance of the flavors and what could have really kicked this up to perfection territory in several categories. But still, I really enjoyed it. Finally, as an example of the style, I give it an 8. And really, it's a very nice stout. As a stout, it's exceptionally well done. As a Mexican style chocolate stout, it's very well done. Certainly well above average. Just the chili presence was a bit too much, and the chocolate needed to be, as a backbone, it's a chocolate stout based on the classic Mexican chocolate, which is the recipe from which we derived modern day hot chocolate. And it should be chocolate present. That was the key and main ingredient. It was the cacao, crushed cacao beans, and it needed more of that. The chili needed to dial back a bit, and I could have used a touch more cinnamon, but it was still fantastic. 8 out of 10, great ranking there. Total score on this one, 84 out of 100. A very, very good score. This is an excellent beer. I really enjoyed it. And as I was drinking this, I was thinking, if they added lactose and kept this recipe the same, just added some lactose to sweeten it up, it would make a totally different beer with the exact same recipe that I think would be particularly enjoyable. Just food for thought. I might play around with some home brewing recipes and try my version and add a little lactose just to see how it comes out. Nonetheless, our second and final beer today was Icicle Brewing Company's Dark Persuasion. This is a German chocolate cake flavored dark ale, 6.5% out of Leavenworth, Washington. This was a good beer. It was a big decadent beer, and it was one of those that I kind of termed dessert beers, but we'll go through the ratings and I'll explain everything. For the aroma was just okay. It was even on the lower end of average, and really all I could detect with any great, kind of presence was the coconut, which wasn't bad. It smelled nice. It just wasn't that pungent, and I couldn't pick out all the other ingredients. German chocolate cake, coconut's the garnish, chocolate's the main star, and I really had a hard time detecting that. I give it a 4 out of 10. Taste-wise, it was not a bad beer. As a dark ale, it would have probably not been, anything I would write home about. As a German chocolate cake dark ale, I think it gave it a little more substance, but frankly, the coconut was so overpowering in this recipe that it just drowned out the chocolate. And if you've never had German chocolate cake, it's very good, it's very decadent, it's very rich and predominantly chocolatey. They either will garnish coconut on a ring or the outside of the frosting, or mix it in to the lighter chocolate frosting that also goes on, that's maybe mixed with buttercream or a cream cheese base. You can make it a few different ways. But coconut's a garnish. The chocolate is the star of the cake, and it was just so overpowering. I couldn't give it greater than average. I gave it a 5. The body on this, for dark ale, kind of a lower ABV than the average dark ales you see these days, but it's still 6.5. It should have some substance to it, and it really just didn't have that much presence. It didn't have that many legs to stand on. It wasn't weak, it wasn't bad, but it certainly wasn't upper echelon. Again, I give it average, 5 out of 10. Where it completely redeemed itself, however, is our next category, the mouthfeel. It was so silky, creamy, smoothie, decadent, which normally for a dark ale would not be appropriate for the style, but I think I can give a little leeway being that it was kind of a dessert beer, a German chocolate cake, and it adds that richness and textural creaminess that you would get from it. If you're trying to mimic a dessert, the mouthfeel and the body are going to be important, and how they pair with the actual dessert in real life. And I thought that was a home run decision. Perfect 10 out of 10 for the mouthfeel for me. The finish on this was very, very, very long. It was very long indeed. Really the only thing that I docked a point for was just the coconut was so present throughout the entire finish of it. It just kept drowning out the chocolate. The finish was very, very long. And really when I'm thinking of the finish, it's predominantly based on length, how much you get out of each sip of the beer. But balance plays a part in there, even though it's its own separate category. So I did dock a point. I gave it a 9. Head and retention on this was great. It was well above average poured from the bottle. I give it an 8 out of 10, well deserved. The appearance on this, also another category it did very, very well. This was a beautiful dark ale. I could see a little light through it, so it wasn't quite as dark as the deepest, darkest dark ales or a really nice deep dark stout. But still very close. I only docked 1 point. I gave it a 9. Balance-wise. Balance, I thought it was on the low end of average, and really it's for the exact same reason that I've mentioned several times and I'm going to keep mentioning. The coconut was so overwhelmingly forward, it drowned out the chocolate in the German chocolate cake beer. It was just too much. I'm not saying it was bad. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the coconut. I'm a fan of coconut. And I also enjoyed the roasty edge to it that gave it some hazelnut undertones, but that's not traditional in German chocolate cake. That's not a flavor you would ever get. And it's certainly, chocolate is the main star. It just wasn't there. I give it a 4 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, same as the balance for the same reason. I don't have to keep saying it. You know why. 4 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, I gave it, wholly average, I gave it a 5. As a German chocolate cake beer, I would say it was average. The balance wasn't there. The flavor profile was completely out of whack. And again, as a dark ale, it was just okay. Everything about it was just okay. It was average beer, by and large, in many, many categories. And as an example of the style, I thought it was average. So I gave it a 5 there as well. That brings the total score on the Icicle Brewing's Dark Persuasion to a 63 out of 100. So this is squarely in the average realm. Now, it's between the high end of average and getting into above average territory, but it's still hovering in the average range. And that was my overall impression, really from sip 1. And when I really broke it down and thought about it and ranked it based on each category and summed it, I was not surprised. It's an average beer. It's good beer. It's not bad beer. It's just average. There are many, many more offerings out there that I would pick over this one. So that's today's review. I hope maybe you learned a little something today. Maybe take away something, maybe, you know, what I like you don't and vice versa. So there could be a ton of people that would absolutely love this beer, even though it's billed as one thing and really came out of something else. Many, many people may really enjoy that, and this could be the beer for them. So just because I'm ranking, honestly, my opinion, doesn't mean that that's how everybody else feels. That's the beauty of craft beer. There's something out there for everybody. Nonetheless, as always, folks, thanks so much for tuning in today. We are growing our channel, and it really does help. I know you hear this all the time on YouTube, but if you consider liking and subscribing, it will certainly help others find my content. And certainly if you want to keep in the loop when we drop our videos, you can click the notification bell and you will get notified immediately when they go live on YouTube. As always, folks, I really appreciate it. We'll see you on the next one. Until then, keep it beer, keep it craft. Cheers.